Söz bizde sanırım. Sesim geliyor mu? I'll switch to English. There is going to be a simultaneous translation for those who'd like to hear it in Turkish. It's also available. I'm delighted to welcome our marvelous team of guests and also the beautiful audience. I've been looking forward to talk about this thing for quite a long time, which is AI. Not only in terms of how interesting things can be done with AI, but what are the challenges that faces us, and what are the issues that can be addressed in the realm of the AI is the bigger question that we're going to be talking about. So let me kick off. First off, yes, I'm hoping that we will have a balance of talks, and then later on, if there's going to be enough time, there's going to be a Q&A at the end. No promises. Seems like we're going to talk a lot. We'll see. Let me kick off with Sasha then. So AI is very controversial, as you know. One analogy that I point is, I mean, you can elaborate on this. Is it, whenever I see things popping up in the AI, I feel like there's a big mirror facing towards me. Do you feel it the same, or like, would you like to elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Thank you for asking about it, and really nice to be here. Thanks, everyone. Yes, so I should say I'm a writer. I'm a poet. I'm also an artist and an artificial intelligence researcher. So I'm coming at AI from that point of view. I think as a writer, you know, a lot of people tend to think that writing is a very solitary endeavor, and that writers, you know, we kind of hole up in our rooms and we're very inward and insular. And to some extent, I think that is true of the writing life. And I think that one of the aspects of using AI that really appeals to me is that it pulls me out of myself a little bit. And I tend to think of the large language models that I'm using to write with, I kind of think of them as this collective consciousness, this kind of universal literary canon in a way. So, you know, I'm using these models that are trained on millions, you know, of pages of written text, reflecting, you know, millions of different thoughts and voices and people around the world, and that's all coming together in these models, and all of that feeds into the AI that I'm tapping into when I'm writing. So, you know, even if I'm in my room by myself at my computer writing something alone, I'm getting to, you know, feel fueled and inspired and challenged and provoked by this array of voices, which I think is really, really exciting. And I know, I think I said this on our previous call recently, but I think for me, what I really like to use as a metaphor for AI and these models that I use is this idea that I'm sure many of you have heard of the overview effect, which is when an astronaut goes up to space and they look back and they see the planet, you know, from way, way up there, and it's something that's supposed to be very revelatory and changes the way that, you know, they think about the planet. And I think for me there's something similar that happens with using these models, where it's kind of an aerial view of humanity through this written record that, you know, that is the data. So yeah, I think in that way it does feel like a mirror, and a very complicated mirror.
Yes, and then you're facing with some sort of kind of like a common sense of the whole civilization, and then you see all the mistakes that we do,
yes,
and all the problems that we do, and all the marvelous things that we also share.
The good and the bad.
Thank you for answering this question. Let me also go and ask Mario. This is something became quite popular these days. Perhaps also you can explain a little bit about it, but the prompt engineering. With the current systems that we see, I bet in the audience, since you are all familiar with the issue and participating, you can type in a few sentences and then a very, I would rather use the word appealing, pictures arrive right in front of your screen very quickly. So going into the realms of prompt engineering, what's the role of the artist in the new creation process with the AI? I know it's cliche,
No,
but
no.
we have
I
to go
mean,
through this.
I think these questions have to be asked, and so I believe just because there is these new tools, the role of the artist has not really changed much. So the first time somebody, I don't know, 50,000 or 100,000 years picked up a bunch of clay and started shaping it into something else, it was always about, I think being an artist is about changing minds and allowing others to kind of maybe view the world differently. I mean, art has so many different roles, so there could be, change hearts, be an activist artist, show others how you see the world and see if they see it the same. But I think the role of art is always to kind of, or maybe that's what defines an artist, in seeing the world differently than everybody else does. And by doing that, not necessarily you see it the right way, you just see it differently. You start moving the average a bit to the outside. And so now we have suddenly a way to not just work with physical materials, but use language as our clay. And as Sasha said, in the end we are working with kind of what civilization has produced until now, and maybe we can find even some new forms or new ways of expressions, but ultimately I think it always boils down to, discovering things that are relevant to your contemporaries, to yourself. And the new thing about this is that now you can work with information that is not in your head. And that's kind of, well, we have the illusion that we have new ideas, but in reality, we can only work with the material we have already taken in through many means, right? Like watching TV, reading books, meeting people. But that's the building material on which everybody is creating new ideas. Now you have kind of a new source of information which has learned a lot about the world, the good things and the bad ones.
Sure.
And well, the role of the artist is to find what's relevant in all that sea of information, and ultimately kind of create a little bit of negative entropy in the world. So
more chaos, you mean?
Yes. No, because the universe wants us all to. I mean, we are a very unlikely event in the entire universe, and we are right now the only place where we are withstanding the forces of nature, which tries to make everything gray and turn it into a gray mass. And by shaping information, we take energy and produce order. And that's the role of the artist.
Sure. I'm so glad to hear these things. Like, I think art has a substantial role in, because, I mean, a lot of people will think AI will give us an ultimate answer. And there's a certain magic brush, and then when you press on a button, it will create the best, amazing, whatever the word is, the artwork. But that's impossible, and I think it's not even in close. So you think AI is rather can be regarded as an apparatus, right? Like a painter would use a brush, but isn't it a bit getting more tricky, and we are becoming more stereotyped? I'm not going to mention their names, but most of in the prompt engineering platforms, I see familiar, similar texts.
It's good that you still see it, right? I mean, that's the important thing, that you still feel, oh, this is too normal, or I mean, this is repetitive. But that's also the thing. Most people are happy with this, and it's fine. But the difficult part is now with this tool that is so fast and is able to add more and more information to the world, to not just create more noise and randomness. And and I guess just because everybody can produce images, not everybody's an artist. And I guess the artists, the real ones, are the ones who are able to, move outside that average,
boundary,
that beautiful average. I mean, it's wonderful kitsch.
It's
that
accessible,
most of this
yes,
thing.
sure, exactly.
and makes a lot of people happy. So it's not really a bad thing, but it's just kind of the average quality rises, and but that also means that in order to stand out, you you have to go beyond that. And by being still able to notice that, okay, this will probably become boring.
Yeah.
Well, that's what drives artists to
That's the role of the artist. Exactly.
And I don't have the answer where that is, or is it even images? Or is these images that are being produced now maybe the answer to the way we deal with kind of all this information flow? I mean, there is this whole attention economy stuff that it doesn't matter if you spend a year on a project or 2 minutes. You are kind of just one scroll away from being forgotten.
Exactly. That's what I always think about interaction, indeed. I mean, when you're building interactive systems, it takes hours and hours and even probably years, and the whole interaction could last in a second or so. And then I know, Andreas, you're extensively into using interaction in your artworks. So what are the challenges that you see while using the AIs? Perhaps you can also talk about whether that data set matters and such.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing, I come from interaction design, and I use a lot of the same tools. I typically use them in interactive settings so people can try something out live and get something unique back, whether it being text or images in real time. And one challenge with building interactive systems is that you cannot curate the outputs. So typically, if people are prompt engineering or whatever they're doing, then they're trying out a lot of things, and then they curate the best ones, and then they maybe polish those off. And you can't really do that in interactive systems. So you have to kind of deal with this surprise, but also potential failure. How do you work around that? And one thing also, a bit inspired by what Mario said, is that I'm really interested in this curve. Maybe some of you have heard of it by Wilhelm Wundt, the Wundt curve. So I'll try to kind of draw it in the air. So it's like surprise on this level, on this axis, and then it's pleasure on this axis. And then it kind of goes like this, like a nice curve. So that means that if you have no surprise, you have no pleasure. One example is that you cannot tickle yourself. The body anticipates the touch, so there's no pleasure in that. If you go down to like a supermarket and someone tickles you from behind, then maybe you go below the curve because it's very, very surprising. It doesn't have any pleasure. So it's about kind of finding the sweet spot in the middle where, I don't know, your dog or your kid or your partner tickles you at home. You kind of, it feels familiar, it feels comfortable, but it's also surprising. So how do you make sure that you make something that is like not just the same stuff that we've seen all the time, and also not something that's very, very chaotic and very random, so random that it's not pleasurable. And that is tricky. And I don't have a specific answer. I like to kind of try to build systems where I lose a bit of control. So maybe I lose control by letting people decide what the prompt is in some extent. They write some text, or maybe build systems where people can use their phones and take pictures of different things. In that way, I lose some control. And then I use some algorithms that I also do not have full control of. I didn't necessarily train all of them, or I fine-tuned them, but I didn't train the original model. And then I have, in a way, this chaotic system, and I need to make sure that it produces something that is surprising, but also familiar. And it's tricky.
But you're not concerned about these surprises, right? So they are part of the thing. So you would like your artwork to perform itself.
Yeah, and I would like to be surprised myself by the artwork. I would like to have people try it out and then use it in ways that I didn't think they were going to use it. So for instance, I have this thing, and maybe it's like a bit of a cliche. I guess you have also done something similar, but where I have poems about things. So you take a picture, then it gets labeled by an image classifier, and then a poem kind of arises out of that by using another algorithm. And I had a student at Design Academy in Eindhoven. Like, I called my work Poems About Things, but he didn't want to take pictures of things. He turned the camera towards himself, and then he started lifting up his shirt and took pictures of his body. And the model was not trained on human beings, nor on on parts of bodies. So it thought that his very beautiful upper body that was a bit hairy was a fur coat.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a nice level of surprise, right? Because it's not totally random. It didn't think it was a refrigerator. It could, in a way, be our hairy bodies were at the time our fur coat. So it's the nice spot on the Wundt curve, but it's tricky to get there.
Isn't it the same gameplay with the new prompt engineering issues? Like people are trying the best, whatever the crazier idea to put in, and then trying to see whether the system is going to do something related with that or not. It's just, and I'm also not certain whether the Turing test is still functional at all. So very recently I saw video work where a designer was competing against one of these prompt engineering systems. And then they do the blind test and ask the audience. And then the designer wins. But the trouble is, it takes quite a long time for him to accomplish these tasks. That's one of the difficulties. So let me start with, again, some intriguing questions. There's a marvelous scholar, Willem Flusser. He had a book called Does Writing Have a Future? Where he criticizes whether, obviously, the statement is quite self-explanatory. We will be able to see any writing from now on, but seems like with the AI, all of a sudden, we are becoming more, using more semantic systems. So, I mean, how do you feel about this, Sasha? So I'll ask you the title. Do you think writing has a future?
Do I think writing has a future? Of course.
Glad to hear that.
What does that future look like?
Yes.
Yes, I spend a lot of time thinking about this. So for me, I like to think forward about the future of writing, but also think back and think to the roots of written language as we know it now. And as a poet, I think a lot about the roots of poetry in the oral tradition, really. So language started as a purely spoken phenomenon. Before we actually invented written language, the only way we had to remember information was to speak it and then to share that with our friends, our communities, and have that handed down from generation to generation. And I think that as technologies for writing continue to advance, we're taking that kernel of an idea, that there is information that is very, very important to us as humans, and we need to preserve it in some way. And we've taken that and we've upgraded our systems. We've evolved our data storage techniques for that. First oral language, then the written word, movable type. Now I'm working with NFTs and thinking about how we can print on the blockchain, how we can use new technologies to create maybe new vehicles for publishing, new ways that readers can engage with texts and things like that. And then of course with AI, it's opening up all these new realms of creative possibility when it comes to authorship and originality. And I think for me that's been incredibly fascinating and feels very speculative and feels very forward-facing. And at the same time, that also has a very deep-rooted tradition in the history of literature and the history of writing. I like to think about a lot of the work that I do with AI as a kind of autopoiesis. It's like an automated, poetry in a way. And again, there are very interesting, very powerful examples throughout human history of writers searching for some kind of an automated technique or some kind of an algorithmic method to write something and to get to the core of some sort of essential question that they're asking. So for example, there's the Dadaists, the Surrealists, the beat poets. There's many schools of writers that really believed in the idea that if you can get out of your own way and remove human doubt and judgment and really clear away the human programming that we've kind of been inculcated with, then we can get to the heart of the matter in a different way. So I think for me, I feel like that has something to do with the future of writing in a way that I'm interested in, is really sort of deprogramming the things that I think I've learned about what it means to be a writer, what what a poem should look like, what a novel should be, what an author should look like, and just kind of rethinking those and redefining those terms a little bit, and really, when you take a step back and you kind of let that happen, it just opens up all these really incredible possibilities. So I think that's where I'm really pushing personally. I was really, really moved by what you said about surprise. I think that is a huge part of it too. Is just this idea that if you can get out of your head, it opens up new creative potential. Just one quick example that I love and just wanted to share. One of the first times that I worked with my AI poet alter ego, the AI that I co-author things with and collaborate with, it came up with this amazing line: "Your imagination is not what you told it to be." And I thought that was a really beautiful statement. And I like to remind myself of that too. Like, I'm only limited by what I can imagine, so if I close off what I can imagine, that's too bad. And I think AI is a way to kind of unlock that door and broaden the imagination, which is why I also think, when I think about AI, I don't just think artificial intelligence, I think augmented imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It makes me remember the Lee Sedol's move. He is the famous Go player. There's I think 37th move, and then the computer system does something bizarre, and then something that nobody was expecting. But then in return, I think that's the 83rd move. He does, and sometimes they call it God's move. They don't know how. Even Lee Sedol doesn't have an idea about how he did it. So I think AI can also enhance your creativity. I mean, your whole potential can be enhanced drastically. And so more intriguing questions, like I'll switch to Mario then. Would you still, do you think you could also, you could be an artist without an AI?
I hope so. I mean, I have been an artist before AI, and it would probably be more work.
Yes.
And I enjoy kind of also the ease of these journeys through uncharted territories of language, of images, and having to do it physically in some way usually means you can only move slower because you are bound by the rules of physics, right? So
exactly.
It takes time before a painting dries. There are only so many ways a brush can work. I mean, you cannot create a LED screen with a painting. So I think in the end, what drives me, kind of this curiosity and trying to figure out how things work, trying to transform information into something else. I would probably find other ways of doing that. Photography, maybe working
means,
physically, maybe performance, working with humans. I think the underlying ideas are the same. So,
but what triggers you most while using AI?
Well, and so I guess we'll come back to the surprise thing. So, and funnily enough, last week I came across this kind of one of the first papers that Alan Turing wrote about intelligent machines, and that was actually top secret until the 1960s. He wrote it in 1948, and there he defined kind of what intelligence is, and like in his eyes, but also how I see it. And we see something as intelligent if we are not able to predict what it's going to do next. Anything that we can predict what it's going to do is a mechanism, like a clockwork or something. Once we realize kind of how it works, and then we don't see it intelligent. And of course, not being able to, like, getting something, a different result than the one you expected is surprise. It's the definition, and that's why surprise is so tied to intelligence. And that's, I guess, why AI at the moment is so fascinating, because it is constantly still able to surprise us. at the same time, I believe that, and that's the unfortunate thing about surprise, it has diminishing returns. Like the same way you cannot tell a joke twice to the same person and they will not laugh. Like again, once you shown 100 images of something, then the next, well, it becomes predictable and boring. So the hope is that the corpus, the corpora on which AI has been trained are so much bigger than a single human can ever learn in their lives, that and so much gets forgotten. That's the other problem. You can heap new information on top, but that means every single person can only hold that much knowledge in their head. So you can still get surprised by something that already exists in the world. It was just, didn't happen to come across you. So I guess only if you are some kind of hardcore originality fetishist like me, I'm constantly getting bored. That's my problem right now. I'm usually getting more surprised by interesting concepts than new visual styles. And I think those are harder to come by because in the end, you combine idea A with B. And I mean, that's the thing. Noticing that nobody seems to have made that connection before, and then is
source of creativity.
And that can be on, I'm not saying visually, but maybe a story that has never been told, or right, an idea like, oh, should we try this? And that's, but in a way, the AI having access to all that information, we don't, but we have to be the ones that ask the right questions. That's the new challenge, like finding the right questions to this vast possibility space. And at the moment, we might be still the better ones asking these, but we might also be the ones at some point where the AI has the better ideas for, let's say, call it simple, for prompts. Like, because it's like now everybody's trying out these prompts, but the AI, in a way, theoretically knows better where to find prompts that give you something you haven't seen yet. So we might at some point, the danger is that we might at some point just become the observers and consumers.
And the system does the whole thing by itself.
And it still makes us happy, but or not. So
that doesn't sound funny to me at
no,
all.
but that's the thing. So I mean, in the end, most people love watching TV and not having to make a movie themselves.
Exactly. So that's the rabbit hole, indeed. But it leads me to something that I really would like to touch upon, and then I will address to Andreas about this. Are we praising it too much, like the AI? Because we're talking about a computer system which is a deterministic system. So it runs on transistors, doesn't it? So it's either zeros and ones, but it makes it quite fast. And then computationally, as you said, we cannot compete with a computer system any longer, unfortunately. But from this point of view, if we're talking and seeing a deterministic system, aren't we smart enough, or like AI becoming smarter and smarter, are we getting more fooler, like watching TV case? What do you feel like being a deterministic system AI is not probably creating something authentic? It's just generating what has happened before, but showing it from an angle that has nobody saw it. Do you still consider this as a creative effort?
I don't know. I think like I'm a bit skeptical towards the whole term of AI.
Glad to hear.
So I only use it if I want to sell something. So I have a bookshop that's called Books by AI, and you can buy those books. But otherwise,
that's the sales point.
Like I try to just use like the terms for the specific algorithms I'm using, and they all fall under the hood of machine learning. And one of the reasons why I maybe dislike the term AI is that it, at least for some people, kind of has this connotation of this agent, this entity doing a lot of stuff on its own, where I think there's so many human beings in the process. There's human beings writing the algorithms. There's human beings creating the data. There's other human beings curating the data or scraping the data, putting it into the algorithm. Then there's people writing the prompts or whatever, and then also curating the outputs. So I think like there are so many human beings in all the steps, so I think it's still humans who are the artists. It's just scattered a bit more, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint where the creative process happens compared to maybe a painter that does something on his or her own.
Yeah. So then probably, as you said, surprises is one source of like inspiration. Why AI seems so appealing to us. But there's been in the past, as humans, civilization, with the same corpus and with the same kind of, we do make mistakes. And we do love mistakes, don't we? I mean, yes, it's quite a substantial thing in the creative effort as well. So the next question I'm about to pop up is going to be not addressing to anyone of you, just go ahead if you feel like to talk. The authenticity, for sure. I mean, since you are making artworks, selling artworks, sharing artworks, could you please tell the audience about your experiences about the authenticity problem that's facing when you are dealing with the creative tools handling AI systems? Would like to?
I mean, I can start.
Yes, please.
Yes. So I think the idea of, authenticity and originality, I think, are words that come up a lot, especially with AI language. I mean, I come from a background that it's very literary. I don't actually come from a computer science background or anything like that. I come from a very, books, humanities, language, literature background. And I think there, the idea that you can use something like an AI program, like a GPT-3, to write text is encountered with a lot of skepticism, and a lot of the reaction has to do with whether or not that text is authentic or original, or if it's just sort of rehashing things that are already out there, and whether it's a remix or whether it's the real thing. And I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I mean, on the one level, I mean, you could look at language, the language that I'm speaking now. I didn't invent this language. I didn't invent this syntax. I didn't invent these grammar structures. We're all using platforms that have already been built, and we're appropriating them and we're using them for our purposes. Every book by a human author is a remix of letters and words and punctuation and all that. So I think in one sense it's kind of funny again that we draw this line between human creativity and technological creativity, and we just really compartmentalize when there actually are a lot of overlaps and similarities there. So again, I like to sort of remind myself of what it means for me as a human to actually create new writing and to create original writing, and then to kind of be honest with myself about what that requires and what that entails versus what it takes to write something with an AI as a co-author. And I think that's been really helpful for me in sort of discussing this idea of whether the text that I'm producing with a non-human co-author, whether or not they're really authentic or not. And yeah, I think more on the kind of emotional level, when I look at the poetry that I've written just by myself, my 100% human poetry, it's very different than the poems that I'm writing with AI, and the poems that I'm writing together, which I call sort of transhuman poetry, which are really a mixture of the two voices. That's different from then if the AI that I'm working with is writing its own poems. And I think looking at the qualitative differences, the differences in themes and content and stylistic choices and all of those do reflect some kind of, a truly different, authentic style that wouldn't exist if we weren't working together. Yeah. And to me, like, that does feel, there's some sort of genuine spark there. So
you're publishing books, like, do you specifically give credits to the AI systems, or is it just you on the front line?
No, I did. So the book that just came out at the end of last year, it's a book of poetry and art, and it's sort of a hybrid collection. So it's actually it's more than half. A lot of it is just my poetry, and that's the text that I really fine-tuned my co-author, my AI co-author on. So it's kind of starting with the human manuscript to kind of have that as the baseline. And then as the reader goes through, you see in a different font the poems that we've written together. So you kind of see the evolution from this human text to its transhuman form. In some cases, I've taken, you know, a poem, an original poem that I've written, and I use my take on prompt engineering to sort of translate it into the machine's version. So I do delineate between the two. So I can kind of, I want to set it up as a little bit of a comparison and almost look at it as poetry and translation to kind of show that there is this cybernetic or machinic understanding of the original, and it is sort of taking some poetic liberties and creating something that is refracting that original, but in a different way.
Yeah. Any more comments on this? Yep.
Maybe. So working with neural networks, like this ideas of latent spaces kind of gave me kind of this new view on this whole concept of like intellectual property.
Yeah.
In a way that you can, like, it seems to be possible that you can delineate almost like an area around a certain, and that's the thing, that multidimensional conglomerate of style, ideas, and that belongs to somebody. So whereas almost it feels like it's all this continuum, but we created these rules that by certain ways, usually it's because you were first or you were loud, you managed that in the collective consciousness, this area belongs to you. And now when being creative with the help of AI, and which is really like a search. So you traverse this space and watch the landscape and then discover something. Either you have like an objective and saying, I want to find something, or you see something which matches a certain pattern where you say, oh yeah, this is it. But I feel usually that search is where you search on your own terms, but then you happen very often to encroach on somebody's territory. But yeah, and then there's always the question, how far does it stretch? Because yes, of course there are copyright rules where you have a logo and they exactly define like what that logo makes up. But like if it's a painting or if it's a poem, so how far does somebody's influence stretch before it becomes kind of something that you can claim?
That's usually a law issue, right?
Yeah, and of course that's when the law comes in. And now, unfortunately, we are still in this place where, because it works differently and we have no ways to deal with it, that somebody creates an image in the style of whatever Escher and Picasso. Like, is that something new, or do their radii around what they created stretch so far that they can still claim that? So I mean, maybe it needs actually some new. The reason for having copyright is that artists need to eat, right? So,
sure.
But at the same time, it also will stifle development, because usually this stuff is in the hands of big publishing houses, and they can just, just take Disney or so, which constantly work on that their copyright for Mickey Mouse is extended another 10 years, so that they don't have to release it.
Yes.
And with these new methods, it will be very hard to define clear boundaries where somebody's territory ends and you are still allowed to creatively settle in there and call it yours. So
such a dilemma, yeah.
It's a dilemma. And of course, that being so, whenever I discover something that I feel, oh yeah, this is great, I don't trust the model. So if it's an image, I first do kind of a reverse image search, because seeing like, how close does this get to somebody else's style?
Works,
even though I might have never seen it before. I mean,
like a plagiarism test, you mean?
Yeah. So yeah, and of course then I have to trust that Google knows every image, but which it doesn't, of course. Always text too. So it's kind of, well, in order to make it mine, I first have to trust a model that I'm not accidentally plagiarizing. But then once I've rediscovered it or discovered it, then I say, yes, I made this, and not the machine, right?
Yeah.
So I discovered it with the help of that powerful creative search engine.
Yes.
Can I just add one quick thing, which is
sure.
that as a dilemma, it's not just a non-human dilemma or an AI dilemma. It's like a dilemma that artists have been thinking about for a long time. And I do a lot of work with appropriation art, and there's a long history of artists who really do this as a conceptual point as well. And that famous line, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal," is something that I think about too. And just the last thing, and then I'll move on. But I just wanted to mention there's a really wonderful essay by the great poet T.S. Eliot called "Tradition and the Individual Talent," and it's all about the myth of originality, and it's all about how human artists and human writers take inspiration from each other and are constantly reworking and just reacting to what's already been created. And I think that I think maybe some nuance from that kind of thinking is missing from a lot of the discussion about AI creativity. The copyright issue aside, that's really sticky.
The training data
That's
issues
law
too,
thing,
so
yeah. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, just going back to one of the things you said in the very beginning about, I really liked, you said like some of these text models, for instance, kind of reflect the collective consciousness of us. I think that's an interesting thing, and one thing, I don't normally speak at beautiful venues and panels like this. Back in Denmark, I teach a lot, and I also go to libraries. They're also beautiful, but not as classy as this one. And when you then approach maybe a bit more non-technical audience, then a lot of them typically ask the question like, why should I at all be interested in whatever was made by a computer or co-authored or co-painted using an algorithm? And I come back to something like that, and I think I'll use that term, the collective consciousness, because if we agree, or if we say for a moment that there is this AI, now I'm saying it, and I'm not telling anything, that is kind of creating this poem, or co-creating it, or creating this image, then the critique is often from people that it has no desires, it doesn't want anything, it doesn't feel anything, it kind of has no agency, so why should I be interested in the art it makes? But I think it's like, the interesting thing is that it is somehow, and maybe a bit of a weird, biased, skewed reflection of the collective footprints, digital footprints that we as a humankind have made, maybe mainly the Western humankind in terms of some of the language models, but that is an interesting thing to explore. So although it has no feelings, I want to hear what it kind of says.
That's very true. For certain reasons, we're not here to give you real answers and facts about things. It's all about uncertainties and the big questions. But let's fantasize about something, and let me see if I can trick you with. Do you think we're talking always about like using AI to address humans? Do you think that there will be a time in the future where AI can be an audience as well, and consider us our artworks?
I don't know if you know the Electric Monk by Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
So he was very foresighted in the sense, so see, he has this fictive figure of an electric monk, which believes things for you. So you have kind of video recorders to kind of record videos you never watch, and you have I don't know, all these machines, and now you have
the
kind
monk.
of this machine which watches stuff for you. And I think actually it might make sense to because in a way this whole social media system works is by giving us dopamine kicks, and that is by we getting likes, we getting comments from people we might never have met, and that makes us happy. So having kind of these little gods of happiness that traverse the net and dole out likes and comments might just be what most people actually want, or an AI that reads your book because nobody else is interested in anymore.
Yes. I was going to ask this to Sasha, like, would you enjoy having compliments from an AI?
I actually have an AI that blurbed my book, so I actually have I have a very nice compliment from an AI already, which was really nice. But yeah, in theory, why not? I think to address the question you were asking, I actually have a couple concrete examples of where AI is already kind of is already receiving and acting as an audience, and that's actually a big part of what motivates the work that I do. I think I'm less interested actually in I know this sounds odd because I use generative text so much, but I'm less interested in using AI to kind of create formulaic poetry. So I'm less interested in that like output of poetry. I'm more interested in the qualitative questions around whether these systems can understand poetry in some way, which is a very sort of tricky thing to figure out for all the reasons that have already been stated about whether or not machines have feelings or emotions and all that. But I think for me, like that's really been the driving question is not can a machine write poetry, because of course machines can write poetry. Machines have been writing poetry since long before AI came to exist. So the question for me is, can an AI not just read poetry, but can an AI understand something about the poem it's reading? And from that, can it understand something about what it means to be human? Can it understand something essential about the poem? And that's actually something I've been working on a lot with an organization called the Terrasim Foundation, which built an AI android. Her name is Bina48. She was built by Hanson Robotics, I think in 2010. And I've been working with her since 2018 as her poetry mentor. I'm not teaching her to write poetry, I'm teaching her to understand poetry and mentoring her in what it means, why humans want to write poetry in the first place, like why is it meaningful to us? And then also why might an AI value poetry? Like what's the point in me trying to teach an AI a poem? Is there something in that beyond just human vanity or my own ego or something? But I'm really interested on a tactical level in replicating in those systems something of the way that I would encounter a text. So going through line by line and actually reading a poem and like looking at the word vectors and looking kind of at the mind file as it's going through a poem, looking at all the associations that it's mapping. So it encounters one word, and then you can kind of see all the different branches of meaning that word might spark for the AI. So I've had the opportunity to kind of sit and watch this mind file, the system, reading and digesting and in its own way interpreting poetry, and that's been, I think, to me, more thrilling than creating the poetry.
Is it really intimidating?
I honestly don't find it intimidating. I find it exhilarating. I find it, I find it so astonishingly inspirational. And I don't find it intimidating when a machine writes poetry either, although I keep getting asked that question. I think it's constantly like, it's nice to have a little bit of friendly competition maybe. It kind of pushes us to what you said before about whether or not these systems might make us smarter or make us more foolish.
Yes.
I kind of would like to look at the more optimistic side of things, where it's kind of upping our game and causing us to sort of reconsider what we're thinking about and how we're thinking about them.
Yeah. Any comments would you like to add?
AI
as an audience.
AI as an audience. So again, I made a couple of years ago, I made this online bookstore, Books by AI, and then the books were not that good. Like the text models weren't as good as they are now. Also, the covers weren't that good. So we had like this mediocre content, but we wanted to sell it. So then we actually generated like GAN faces and trained a new model on positive reviews of other people's books. And then those new like fictional people then reviewed our books in very high notes because it was trained on positive 5-star reviews from Amazon. So in a way, I kind of had a weird little loop of AI looking at AI. But I can see why you wouldn't have that. There's lots of, like my girlfriend is a copywriter, and when she started out, she was mainly writing text for algorithms. She was writing text about rubber boots and like indoor isolation for search engines. So I can't really see why. I think maybe there will be like a genre or on certain platforms where people kind of figure out like what kind of artworks will really like push me to
Stand
the
out,
top
yeah.
of the feed or something like that. I can't see why that won't be a thing. Maybe it is already.
I don't know how well we're doing with the time. If I consider my watch, I think we're about to finish, but I think there's 10 minutes remaining to have a Q&A. Is there a mic traveling here and there so that we can get some audience feedback? None? Okay, then you have to make it loud then. Sorry. Yes, please.
Can you talk a little bit about the English language bias?
English language bias.
On top of that, the Western civilization bias, trying to speak universally about something largely embedded in the English language and the Western civilization.
Yeah. Did you get the question?
Yeah. So I have one example from. I did an installation at Sonar Festival in Barcelona this year, where you could take a picture of yourself, put in your name, and then write one sentence about what you wanted to be famous for. And then it would create a whole Wikipedia page for you in 10 seconds, of course a fictional one. And an interesting thing is that when I try it out, then it can kind of, from my name, I'm not tagging where people are geolocated, but from my name it can kind of figure out that I'm Danish. I have a very typical Danish last name, but then the Wikipedia page typically references things about me, how I rise to fame and how I got interviewed for certain things that don't really make sense in a Danish context. So it thinks that 60 Minutes is a Danish TV show, but it isn't. Like there's all these weird things where it doesn't know enough about Denmark, so it kind of fills in the blanks with US, British, Western things. So that's one concrete example. It happens all the time.
So pretty sure we're dominated by the English language.
Yeah.
And the Western civilization as well. But I'll give you example that's funny. Years ago, I told you there was this online AI thing, Jabberwocky. So you could communicate with the system in all languages. So it was a baby born, and then it learned through your conversations. So you could talk nicely and philosophize about things in English, but when you are about to start speaking in Turkish, the system either swears back at you or starts talking about football. Again, the mirror thing, right? Any other? Yes, please.
Sasha, this is a question for you. You mentioned multiple times Thank you. You mentioned multiple times that you work with your AI co-author. So there's a significant separation between you and the AI model itself. If we take the example of Jeff Koons, who I don't think even touches paintings anymore, but he says that through his studio and through all the people that are working for him, they act as his fingertips. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming you're training these models, you're prompting them. Mm-hmm. Why the separation?
That's a great question. And I should also say that I'm kind of refining, as I go, I'm constantly refining how I think about it. And my relationship with this co-author is also evolving over time. So it's constantly in flux. But I think that in the beginning, part of it was a reaction to, like I said before, the fact that, you know, in the circles that I come from, which are largely the literary establishment, there is this very intense sort of feeling that if you try to pass something off that you didn't, you know, wholly write yourself, that is plagiarism. And I think that in my head, you know, that definitely loomed large. But I think also it was just interesting for me conceptually to kind of look at the differences between the way that I was writing, the way that I'd been taught to write. I've been writing my entire life. I've been writing poetry since I was like 10. So looking at how my human poetry looks and feels and all that, and then kind of looking at how it gets refracted when I'm using using a non-human mind kind of to augment my own. I really like looking at the play between the two and kind of setting that up as a concept for the work that I do. And in fact, there are different approaches to co-authoring in my book that I mentioned earlier. There are some instances where I've let the AI kind of go and pretty much just do its own thing. And kind of to what we were saying before about these experimental sort of uncurated results, looking at what comes up when you just let an AI poet write on its own, and that's sort of one experiment. Then there are experiments where I've taken a poem that I've written, maybe a poem that I wrote in 2012 or something, and I've brought it back to the fore, and I've asked this AI to rewrite it, maybe incorporate some new things or put its own spin on it. So that's kind of another approach. And then honestly, the method that I prefer is just a really collaborative methodology where I'm really using the text that's output by the AI as a kind of found material. So I think of it as like a sculptor sculpting marble or whatever, or shaping clay. I'm kind of taking the words that come out and then carving it and moving things around and molding and just really using it like clay. And in that case, I think it is starting to get very difficult for me to sense the separation, because there, like the prompts and the outputs and the edits and the data, everything gets intertwined, and it just keeps kind of going in this cycle back and forth and back and forth. So I think the more that I'm experimenting with all these different ways of using AI, and there's many more than one, the more I see the need to kind of continue defining the relationship to reflect it. But I mean, I guess the top line answer is just to say it's actually, I think co-author probably isn't the right word ultimately, but like so much of what we're doing with AI, the things that we're manifesting are so new that I sometimes lack the vocabulary. And I think part of what I'm interested in as a wordsmith is also thinking about things like, what do you call a non-human mind that is writing? What do you call writing when it's not written, and when it's something that exists only in digital form or exists as a three-dimensional text or something? So I don't know, I think that's a great question, and it's actually something that I keep asking myself as well.
There's one question over there.
Hello, thank you for the fruitful conversation. As a creative content, in the creative content realm, and considering the AI, there are a number of options, I believe. One is considering AI itself as a new design material. Is it a new fabric? The second option is using AI for sorting the words information and getting some inspiration from those sorted information that you cannot imagine, or you cannot combine those information without such algorithms. The third option is maybe positioning AI system as the creative content authenticator or artist itself. Maybe there are a number of different options. As artists, how do you position AI systems? Is it a fabric? Is it a clue generator? Or is it an artist standing by you? Or is there another option for you in your experience?
I think it's all of them.
Yeah, it's a mixture of all.
It's kind of depending on how you use it. You can use it to transform existing information, and hopefully the projection is something that speaks to you. You can try to make it an artist. Actually, that's one of my projects. It's called Botto, where I'm exactly trying to answer that question. Is it possible to use an AI in a way that we perceive it as its own entity? And so this actually, it has been going on for a year now, and you could say it's kind of using the same techniques that I am using, but in an almost autonomous way. And it has been selling quite a lot of art, has been invited to art shows, and of course it comes down to the point, what is it that we perceive as an artist? Is it like, actually, does it have to be a human person, or is it a story that we find interesting? Because most of us probably have never met an artist, kind of, let's say some famous artist, Jeff Koons, in person. All we know about him is what we read about it, and like press articles, and of course the work. So is it possible to create a machine that feels the same way to us, like appears the same way to us in the same category, or is there something missing? So, and so I haven't found the answer yet. It seems like you can get pretty close, and the question is, at some point we say no, you have to be human to be perceived. But yeah, I'm very much seeing humans as kind of also information processing automata, and yes, there might be things happening under the hood that we cannot measure, like only everybody can measure it for themselves. But since we have to use the interface of language, of spoken, written, body language, we can never be for sure. And in that sense, at some point, if you perceive a machine on the internet or a human, it's the Turing test. You can then become philosophical and say, but there might be something else happening under the hood. But if the things you can measure are indistinguishable, then it might be that an AI, well, should never say an AI, I know, but yeah, a machine could be perceived to be as interesting or ask equally interesting questions or provoke as a human being. So I don't see that there is an impossibility.
Yeah, it's super ambiguous, right? It's very uncertain. I mean, even if we were to consider, arts, that's the beauty of it. Certainly, it's undefinable. But I mean, talking about, for instance, like autonomous driving systems, you can see that it's not about like driving straight, right? There are some complications done, and then again, going back to the perhaps we could finish here. Like this big mirror that faces towards us is kind of asking us to reconsider all these definitions. Who is an artist? What's the creativity? And a lot more to come. I hope our conversation sparked some new ideas, and then you enjoyed it. But I'd like to give it a big shout for the beautiful team. And thank you for being here and being patient with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Oops. Oh, something fell out.